Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to this Arboricultural Association Wednesday webinar sponsored by Still. My name's John Parker, CEO at the association, live from Stonehouse in Gloucestershire in the UK, and I am your host for this evening. Please do say hello in the chat, let us know where you're watching from, and submit any questions you may have using the Q&A button. Tonight is all about orchards with presentations from Maria Kennedy and Iva Bedenko. But first, next week, we will be joined by John Hartill, Francesca Hunger, and some other friends for an evening all about fluid dynamics and tree and wind interactions. It's going to get very technical. And then on January the 29th, our speaker is Gerard Pasola for his presentation, The Shape of the Crown, How Healthy and Solid Branches Fall Inexplicably Every Day. And you can register for those for free right now on the website. So say hello in the chat, tell us where you're watching from, select everybody, not hosts and panelists, otherwise not everyone will be able to see your incredible contributions. Use the Q&A button for your questions, and we will crack on with this evening's business. It is my great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Iva Bedenko, to the virtual stage. Iva, it is over to you.
Hi, John. Thank you for your introduction. Let me just share my screen. So thank you again for inviting me to this webinar. So first of all, I'm an architect, so I'm sort of not at home with tree people, but I came to a urban forestry forum in Belgrade 2.5 years ago, and I really enjoyed that. It was really a fun crowd, and I was sort of started to open my perspective towards noticing trees, noticing the importance of trees in the city, in nature in the city. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to be part of these discussions because architects and city planners tend to hold to their own profession, while the tree people also talk to other tree people, and then we don't really have a true discussion that we should have in order to do something. So I'm going to stop introducing my being here. I'm just going to say that I'm going to talk about nature-based solution and urban orchards in the city of Zagreb. It's not really a tradition that we have, but it's maybe it's a feature of the city that I recently just started noticing, and it seems that fruit trees are existing in the city of Zagreb, and there are old fruit trees, and people used to have little orchards in their gardens in the city. So the city does have fruit trees, but it does not maybe recognize them. So I work in the municipality of Zagreb, and for the past couple of years, I've been working on some EU-funded projects, Horizon projects and Interact projects that more and more are dealing with the city greenery and with the nature-based solutions and with the urban gardens. So I sort of stepped out of my comfort zone some years ago.
Yeah,
So
no problem.
I wanted to share a picture of a tree because I was thinking about trees. I was trying to make this presentation more interesting than just an outline what we do within a European project. So I just wanted to share a picture of the most magnificent tree that I have ever seen. It's in the Dominion Park in Auckland, New Zealand. And this looks like a perfect tree to me. It's really huge because it does not have any obstacles to its growth. It looks just perfect. So I guess what we should try to do is try to find a way to give every tree and every living being the perfect conditions for its growth. So anyway, as I was thinking about trees and orchards and fruit trees in the cities, I thought about, I went to Seville 20 years ago, and I was really amazed by these by these tree lines in the city with oranges everywhere. So this looks like a land of abundance to me, and I think it's really beautiful when you have those trees that are giving their best to be part of the city, not just they aren't just beautiful. They also give fruit, they give shade, they give all they can, and people are really enjoying it, and it's really contributing to the city and to the image of the city. So just to give you a short introduction about Zagreb. Zagreb is the capital of Croatia. It's, I guess for Croatia, it's a big town, but actually it's a mid-sized town Europe-wise. We have around 770,000 inhabitants. That's the number from the census from 3.5 years ago. And Zagreb is it's a sort of, it has a nice has a nice position. It's 2-hour drive from the sea. It's 1-hour drive from the mountains. It has 75% of the surface in Zagreb is green, many forests. There are some other green areas which are not really shaped, which are just I don't know, like undefined green areas, and we want to do something about them. So this is also a way to give some extra quality to these areas. There's also a river in the city, so Zagreb is placed between a mountain and a river. And with all those green features, green parts, we really need to make the best of it. I mean, we really need to make use of this fantastic position and this nice nature that we have in the city. But there's another point, there's another perspective of the fruit trees in the cities, which I only recently found out about. So people are actually afraid of them because they have this idea that the fruits are going to fall down, there are going to be wasps, there are going to be flies, there are going to be rats. I don't know. It's like, it's dirty. It's not, it's, I don't know, it's maybe too natural for some people. So this is, and there are many people who are afraid of this, and there are many people who are against having fruit trees in parks, in public parks. Of course, you can have a fruit tree in your garden if you want. So this is, we have a lot of work in front of us to educate people and also to involve people to work with these fruit trees, with these orchards. So if we want to implement fruit trees in the city on a public place, we need to be aware of who's going to take care of them. So this is just one point that I didn't think about at first, but then it came to my mind. I mean, it was brought up to my mind. I didn't think of it myself. So another thing about Zagreb. So Zagreb has this scheme of urban gardens. This is not the most recent map of the urban gardens. There are a couple more since this one was made, but I just wanted to give you an outline. So you can see from the city structure, you can see where is the river. To the upper part of the slide is the mountain. You can also see it from the structure of the trees, of the streets and roads. And of course, the urban gardens are at the outskirts of the city. So the urban gardens, this is a project that the city has been running for almost 12 years now, and it's quite popular. So the city is using unbuilt parts of the city, unbuilt zones, which are owned by the city. That's quite important, that the land is arable, that the land is empty of construction, and that the land is owned by the city. So the city is the city is organizing this land into parcels for people to grow fruits and vegetables and herbs and flowers. they are not allowed to grow fruit trees, unfortunately, but since this land is temporarily being used as gardens, it's not it's a final use, and of course also if you have a tree on one parcel, and maybe you can make a shadow on another one, and it could create a problem. So this is a community project that seems to have built a community on those gardens. So each one of those gardens has a little community of gardeners. They, of course, they have some problems, but they it seems like they are solving the problems themselves. This is really an example of sustainable land use and at the same time community building. So to expand on that, the city has received many requests to prepare a garden that would be accessible for people with disabilities. So this is how we came to the therapeutic garden that we have co-created within one European project. Actually, it's the Horizon 2020 project, Progireg, where Zagreb was one of the front-runner cities, and where we just learned about nature-based solutions, and where we started to do these kinds of projects and to expand on the existing city project. So these are children from the Little Home Daycare for Children with Disabilities. They have, not the children, but their therapists have been very helpful in designing the therapeutic garden. So this was, at first, the plan was to have another urban garden with gardening lots, but then we decided that we should use this one as a therapeutic garden. So what you see here to the left of the slide, to the bottom left, is a communal area with benches and with barbecue. To the top left, you have some raised garden beds. Then the curvy ones are the sensory garden with Mediterranean herbs. And to the front, you see where the entrance is, you see the brown round thing, that's the stage. And to the right is the yellow curved thing is the sensory path. So this is where the children and grown-ups with disabilities can, with the help of their therapist, they can take their shoes off and they can walk along this path. It has different kinds of surfaces. So the whole point of this garden is not really to grow vegetables, because there's not a lot of space for that, but it's actually to give freedom to people who are usually always protected from their surroundings. Here they have surrounding that they can be really involved with. They don't need to be protected all the time. They have more freedom than they usually have. So this is just one photo from the opening. I took this one myself. I really like this one because we have this. I think this really demonstrates how this project has sort of given. It sort of began like a taking over of the former industrial area with this very gentle, very human scale intervention. So I think it's like a conquest of people over declined industries. So I'm really, this one I think really demonstrates what we wanted to do, and we are really trying to make it work. There are some problems. There have been cases of vandalism, but we are still trying to do our best to improve it, to work on it, to give it more features. So this is what we did last summer. We made a workshop to build a horticultural gardening bed. So it's you can Google it, but it's really super interesting because the concept is to build like a little hill with plant material inside. Then you really water it heavily, and then it sort of waters itself because all this plant material soaks up the water. So if you don't water it regularly, it still does not die. And then also this plant material slowly decomposes, which also creates, which also fertilizes this garden bed. And so now it's time to talk about the urban orchard. So this is just an outline of the kinds of the species that we want to have there. So we want to have, of course, the heritage fruit trees and shrubs and flowers. They all need to be local. They all need to be accustomed to the local climate, and of course, with we also have to have in the perspective that the climate is changing. So we are also thinking about that with while we are choosing the species for these orchards. So there is one urban orchard that is already in place in Zagreb. It was introduced a year and a half ago, but of course it's very young. You need to have time for the orchard to grow. So right now it doesn't really look very presentable, but we need to have patience. So to the right, you see the mayor and the vice mayor planting the trees. So Zagreb's mayor and vice mayor are from a party that's very green, very progressive. So right now we are happy that they are supporting the projects that we do. So a few more pictures of the, you imagine great trees here, imagine fruits, and yeah, this is what it will look like. And finally, let's see, the urban orchard that I was actually talking about at the Urban Forest Forum in Zagreb 2 years ago, 1 year ago, sorry. This is this is one part, a neighborhood in the easternmost part of Zagreb. It's called Brestje. And as you can see from this picture to the right is a photo that's on the floor of the local school. So they can see they're part of the city, and they can see where their houses are, where they live. So you see, this is a very nice, I think it was built in the 70s, very nice planned, like a garden city. To the left is the schoolyard. So actually in this, the red part is the area, is the plot where we are going to make this new urban orchard. So to the bottom of the plot is the schoolyard, and it's actually it's in this quiet residential neighborhood. Many people have gardens, but still what we found out when we spoke to the people there, they do have gardens, but they don't have enough public space. They don't really have parks. So you see, this is a very green neighborhood, but they don't have many public greens. So in a way, when we were talking to people about what we are planning to do, they were very happy about it. So this is what it looks like now. There's a bench and there's a tree, and well, there's all this potential that we plan to accomplish here. And between the school and the plot is a stream. But even though we have a stream here, and Zagreb has a lot of underground water, still when we were planning to drill for groundwater for watering this urban orchard, there was no water on the depth of 15 meters. And this is the depth that we can reach with our price range, with our budget. We can, if there's water on this level we can fetch it. If not, we just will need to find water elsewhere, and we'll do it, of course. So what we needed to do, what is really important in projects like this, and in any projects that are EU funded, we need to make these projects, we need to get them closer to people. We need to introduce people to these projects. We need to ask them what do they want to have there. We need to ask them how do they want to spend their time there. So we had several workshops with people from Brescia. First one was with the school children. That was really very nice. And I have to admit, I was always afraid that people were going to be critical about the project, and they're going to be critical about the municipality people, talking to them, making something in their vicinity. But I was really wrong. People were really very enthusiastic about the project, and they were really happy to be involved in those workshops. So we gathered those kids, and we asked them to draw what do they want there. And of course, they were full of ideas, and there were so many ideas which were not really realistic. But it was anyway. It was very nice to involve them. They were really happy to be to have a voice, and there were some good ideas there. Of course, you cannot grow watermelon or pineapple there, but some of the other things you can do. They wanted to have. They wanted to have benches. They wanted to have like a little playground. And these are all things that can be achieved, because this is not just an orchard in a classical sense. It's actually a city park, but the trees are not regular trees, but they are fruit-bearing trees. So you can see the pride of those kids. And we also talked to their parents, who were also very enthusiastic and who really had plenty of ideas, who were really who wanted to know things, it was really a lively discussion. It was really very interesting. So we went, of course, to the plot, and there's one more thing that we found out about when we went to this plot for the first time. This is actually a meadow where people walk their dogs. So dog walking is sometimes people think that dogs just live around dog shit, but it's actually what is happening there is if people walk their dogs over there, they will. I think there will not be so much vandalism, because it's like a kind of a neighborhood police. You have people who are there, who have some sort of. They're there all the time. They are there in the evening. So if you have people there with dogs, they're not going to be, I don't know, drunk teenagers. And I really love teenagers, but some of them are really not always. I don't know. They don't know how to act, or they have all this frustration that they need to take out on something, and we don't want it to happen to our orchard. So of course, we had a workshop with the teenagers, which was. I think that was the nicest one, really, because those kids, they're like this species between kids and grown-ups, and they're really great people, and they were really touched by the fact that we asked them to what do they think. So they were really enthusiastic, and they had so many ideas. So. Here they drew some of those ideas. They gave us these sketches. They wanted to have some space. They wanted to have fruit trees and benches below, and some kind of a gazebo. And there was this girl who said that she insists that we make like a corner for writing, not just for reading, but for writing, because she wants to be a writer. And here is another one. Okay, to the left is kutak za pisanje, which means a corner for writing, so she wants some quiet there. There's also a corner for cats, corner for dogs, corner for kids, which is smaller than the one for dogs. So yeah, everybody has their own perspective. This one was more architectural, so the things that looks like the sun, actually, these are the street lights because they're aware that this park needs to have some lightning to be safe at night. So these are the kids, and you can see us at the bottom. We are so happy with this workshop. This was really great. And finally, we got all this input and gave it to the landscape architect who made this idea solution. And this is actually, we have to do this year. So if next year there is a webinar, I think I can have some actual photos of the actual orchard. So you see, this is a very nice design with it has all these parts. There's a biodiversity meadow, there's an orchard with the heritage trees, there's this purple part where there are benches and where there is room for people to socialize. So I think the architect took most of the suggestions. And yeah, this is also the cross section, which is also a very nice image. So yeah, this is it. So the next stage is implementation, which hopefully will happen this year. And so next time I see this crowd, I will hopefully have more to show. For now, this is it from my side. So hopefully this was interesting enough, and I think I can stop sharing now. Thank you for your attention. Where is the stop share button? It's here.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Eva. Everybody absolutely love that. They love clicking their little buttons and sending emojis up, and that's what they seem to be doing over there.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really love that feedback. It really meant a lot to me.
Don't tell them that, because they just keep doing it. They won't stop.
No, just do it.
Oh, now, wait and see what happens now. You asked for it now. Here we go. I know what they're like. They're children, all of them. That was absolutely brilliant, and we would love, I think, to know what happens in a year's time and beyond with that project. It's a great project, and it's frustrating, isn't it? Because a lot of the time we see these amazing projects, you never see how they turn out. So I think we'd love to follow that one through. So please do come back and we'll have to get you to do an article for the Art magazine or something as well and let us know. So thank you, Eva. If you've got any questions for Eva, please put them in the Q&A button. We will do them all at the end. But for now, we will jump straight over to our second speaker, also about orchards, but rather different and on the other side of the world. Maria, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I'll share my screen. By the way, Eva, I'm all for the writing nook in the park. I'm down with that teenager. I totally want the writing nook in my own urban orchard. Let me share my screen here. Oh, all right, so I'm Maria Kennedy. I am a faculty member in the Department of American Studies at Rutgers University in New Jersey, which is just like an hour outside of New York City. And I'm going to be talking to you today mostly about upstate New York, and I'll have some maps so we can see where we're going. And I have my presentation written out, so I'm going to read it as I wrote it for the most part. So in 2019, American cider maker and orchardist Andy Brennan published, there we go, Uncultivated, which is the book shown here. Wild Apples, Real Cider, and the Complicated Art of Making a Living, in which he describes his ideology of uncultivation, privileging the discovery, care, use, and propagation of so-called wild apples in the reforested areas of the Catskill Mountain Range in upstate New York. Preferring that to conventional forms of cultivation and farm business management. Brennan's ideas have contributed to a groundswell of enthusiasm for apple foraging in the Northeast region of the United States and beyond in recent years. And just to let you know where we are, here we are in New York. I'm just outside of New York here, and mostly we're going to be talking about upstate New York. And to give you a little bit more perspective, here are some of the regions of New York State that I'll be talking about. We've got the Hudson Valley in purple, the Catskill Mountains here in red, and then beyond that, the Finger Lakes are in green, and Cornell University, which is where my collaborator Greg Peck is up here in the Finger Lakes in this green area. And we'll also venture further up into the northern parts of New York State as well. So just to give you a little bit of geographical range of where we are. So cider producers in the emergent American cider industry have been searching for the remnant orchards of abandoned farms and the feral offspring of cultivated trees now scattered in the second growth forests across the American Northeast. There is an increasing interest in the significance of wild apples as a source of potential new cultivars that are disease-resistant, locally adapted to climate change, and expansive in qualities of taste and use in cider. To understand the social, environmental, and agricultural implications of the practice of foraging, my colleague, Dr. Gregory Peck of the School of Integrative Plant Sciences at Cornell University, and I began to explore foraging as an indicator arena where both cultural and biological resources are in flux. Foraging is a vernacular practice, and as we have found, it can also be an informal citizen science network of experimentation. In their search for these uncultivated trees, we believe foragers are exploring emergent pathways for interconnected social and biological change as they reevaluate the materials, resources, and social histories of the American landscape. Our project, in partnership with the New York Cider Association and funded by the Einhorn Center for Community Engagement at Cornell University, seeks to highlight the diverse motivations of these apple foragers with a particular focus on the relationships people form in their social networks around trees and the aesthetic, culinary, and horticultural choices guiding their selection and propagation of specimens. Our transdisciplinary collaboration spanning sciences and humanities is structured around the collection of ethnographic interviews with foragers, mainly in the state of New York, and the analysis of fruit samples collected from our research participants for fruit quality, chemical composition, and genetic fingerprinting. So first, my presentation will explore the emergence of a discourse of foraging in the United States following the recent growth of the cider industry here. And then I'll profile several of our research participants to illustrate a range of motivations and experiences. But to give you just another sense of where we are, this is the Finger Lakes National Forest, which is that sort of northwestern portion of New York State. This is not far from Cornell University. We can drive there in about 20 minutes from the university. And this is one of the places where some of the foragers who we got to know first were doing their foraging. This is a piece of land that is, it has a really interesting history. It was, first of all, used by indigenous peoples. It was then settled, it was farmed, and then the state bought this land back and created a national forest. So although it looks like a wild place, it has a history of occupation and cultivation, which is why there are apple trees there in the first place. But before delving into the discourses of foraging in popular media and interview texts, I want to briefly gesture to two authors whose work on ruin, survival, heritage, and foraging inspired some of my thinking that you might find interesting. The first one is Caitlin DeSilve, and in her book, Curated Decay, she explores how we think about the value of heritage that is decaying, lost, or profoundly changed by the effects of time. I think about this as I consider why lost orchards, ruined farmsteads, and traces of past agriculture fascinate some of the foragers we talk to. And she writes this: a fascination with things ruined, decayed, derelict, and transient plays out in a continuous loop in Western aesthetic intellectual traditions, inflected through each iteration with a slightly different emphasis, each meeting a different need: Baroque, Gothic, Romantic, picturesque. These labels signify cultural moments when people saw something of value in material transformation and disorder, rather than stasis, when sensibility was attentive to transience and titillated by decay. The other author is Anna Lowenhaupt Singh, and her ethnography of foraging, The Mushroom at the End of the World, on the possibility of life in capitalist ruin. She's helped me think about how foraging exists within larger social and economic systems. For her, the marginality of practices like foraging speaks to social and biological processes of evolution and survival. She helps me think about why foraging is emergent and significant now, and she writes this: "Many pre-industrial livelihoods from foraging to stealing persist today, and new ones, including commercial mushroom picking, emerge, but we neglect them because they are not part of progress. These livelihoods make worlds too, and they show us how to look around rather than ahead." So both Singh and De Silva in their explorations of processes of ruin and survival prompt me to be mindful of how participants use these frames to navigate the complex worlds they're living in. And so let's go from there into some of these discourses and how they came about in recent years. A discourse of foraging and wild fruit began to emerge in the popular media shortly after the sudden rise of cider as a renewed category of alcoholic beverages in the American market, heavily influenced by the founding in 2010 of Cider Week, which was a marketing event championing craft producers in New York, created by food and farming nonprofit organization Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. Even more consequential was the nationwide launch of the Angry Orchard brand, owned by Boston Brewing Company in 2012, which further propelled hard cider into an ascendant media coverage and ubiquitous commercial presence on the shelves of many grocery and beverage markets. In just a few short years, cider suddenly became a booming industry in the United States, with hundreds of new producers entering the market. Amidst a plethora of marketing narratives driving the popularity of this new industry, including historical references to the American founding fathers, Johnny Appleseed, Prohibition, distinct narratives around wild fruit and fermentation and foraging also emerged. Wild became a buzzword and foraged a badge of authenticity in opposition to mass market industrial products. It should be noted that this emphasis on wild and foraged fruit is distinct in the American market, whereas in the United Kingdom, the largest producer of cider in the world, terms such as heritage and craft are usually more meaningful, but I'm interested to see that evolve over in the UK, as well as that market has really evolved in the past few years. Several media texts illustrate the development of this discourse in North America over a period of several years. So the first one here, in 2013, the food commentary site Grub Street published a profile of Andy Brennan, who published the book I started out with, and showed how he had begun to build a following for his foraged ciders. And here, there's a quote there from the article. "Brennan gets his apples mostly via foraging trips. He and his wife Polly scrounge around the woods and collect wild apples from the branches or off the forest floor. Some are no larger than golf balls, and nearly all are ugly, bruised, bee-stung, and possibly home to worms and other varmints." Brennan, who would go on to publish his book on Cultivated in 2019, was a constant presence in the media coverage of the rise of cider as a new and hip beverage category, and was often heralded for his foraging activities and his use of wild fruit. Significant purely for its index of relevance to mainstream popular culture trends, foraging wild apples and cider even made it into an article in Vogue magazine in 2015 with this description of the newly hot but quaintly old-fashioned seasonal beverage positioned next to a model leaning against a tree in a Tweety ensemble. Now the old guard of artisan and backyard cideries, the article says, that have always crafted serious juice in more often than not bone-dry styles has started to garner the attention it deserves, and up-and-comers are seeking out forgotten and wild apple varieties to add to the diversity of cider expressions available on the market. Vogue's article was followed that same year by a much more substantial article by culinary author Rowan Jacobson called New American Ciders with the Feral Cider Society. And he extolled the uniquely American cider vintages to be made by finding fruit at the side of the road. He says this: "It's a century-old tragedy with a happy ending. Sweet apples make boring booze. Making cider out of them is like trying to make wine with table grapes. Great cider requires special varieties, but Prohibition swept those from the American landscape. Now there's a scramble to find good fruit. Some cider makers have imported varieties from England and Normandy, but a few of us have realized that the most tantalizing fruit of all lines the dirt roads and abandoned cellar holes of rural America." End quote. Jacobson's article sought to elevate foraging and wild fruit through a more serious consideration of its emergence from historical landscapes and local terroirs, attempting to put it in a larger conversation with European gastronomy and carving out a claim for uniquely American culinary materials and tastes. Jacobson's piece following his earlier book, Apples of Uncommon Character, moved foraging and wild fruit beyond a merely hip new food fad and connected it with an elite discourse of culinary culture and more complicated conceptions of human landscape relationships that would find further expressions in the writings of foragers themselves. If the early media accounts indicated a bubbling popular discourse on the topic of wild apples and foraging in relation to the growing cider industry, some foragers began to think more deeply and critically about the practice themselves, resulting in the publication of works speaking to the more internal audience of foragers or orchardists and cider makers. Self-published in 2017, Matt Kaminsky's book, The Wild Apple Forager's Guide, begins by describing the author's own fascination with the landscape in which wild apples exist. He says this: "The trees which I have worked most closely with in my few seasons spent working with apples are those populations of wildings whose independence and wherewithal to survive in society's unmanaged places presents them openly. We apple foragers exist as the naturalist, the orchardist, and as our inner animal selves simultaneously. In the neglected parts of our landscape, we watch the tree evolve through dormancy to bloom, through fruit production, graduating with harvest. We get to know the tree inside the home it has made for itself." But Kaminsky's interaction with trees is not only framed by this romantic idea of union with a landscape of ruin, characterized as unmanaged and neglected. He also sees wild trees as a potential resource for a different kind of survival, as a potential hedge against climate change. He goes on writing, "Amid this childlike wonder of wild apples, I have come to personal conclusions about where we stand with apples today. Climate change is bringing more extreme types of weather into all regions of planet Earth. The wide genetic variability in apples is easy to see. It affects all aspects of the fruit, as well as the growing conditions that the tree itself can tolerate." While Kaminsky's self-published volume emerged from a grassroots practice of foraging and speaks largely to a grassroots audience, a more broadly available volume is the one we started out with, published in 2019, Andy Brennan's book, Uncultivated, which reached a wider public. It is a manifesto and a personal history of his journey into the forests of upstate New York, finding lost orchards and feral trees with which he makes his cider. And it expands the scope of significance from foraging to a larger critique of capitalism. He says this: "Land is limited, success is fleeting, seasons change, and multiplicity is a healthy adaptation for survival. These are all natural principles that conflict with modern humanity's modus operandi: constant growth, limitless absorption, specialization, the need for certainty. My goal in writing this book is not to rebuke the business or farms that float modern people. In fact, they seem required. I simply want to remind myself and others that another way exists. I've been lured down that path and I've discovered a personal success by emulating the apple trees along the road. They are becoming wild. Brennan is actively exploring this idea of uncultivation, the removal from expansionist economies and biological interventions. Uncultivation is not merely the state of the fruit he seeks, it is a philosophy of living. He continues on, saying, uncultivation is an action. To uncultivate is to encourage the transformation from one state to another, just like cultivation, except that it seeks its opposite horizon. It seeks to peel back the layers of cultivation. I have no delusions of uncultivating my way back to the Garden of Eden, but I would like to see cultivation return to a place that I feel is healthier. Brennan's philosophy of uncultivation in practice, beyond the sourcing of fruit, contributes to his complicated presence as a media avatar of foraging for the cider industry, as well as an important practical mentor for many engaged in this activity today. Part of a network of avant-garde artists and food connoisseurs in the orbit of New York City, he was able to transform a grassroots vernacular practice of foraging shared by many people in rural communities into an artistic statement and a powerful marketing narrative. He is certainly not the first contemporary commercial cider maker to incorporate foraging into his personal or business practice, but framing his activity as an act of art and ideology rather than merely as a means of subsistence or production allowed him to appeal to an urbane New York City consumer and sell 500 milliliter bottles of cider made from foraged fruit for up to 45 American dollars each. So, take that for what you will. From this focus on philosophy to a detailed study in foraged fruit itself, the works devoted to foraging within the community continue to evolve the complexity of engagement with this topic. So the work you see on the screen here is another one by Matt Kaminsky. In 2020, he published a new volume, the first of a planned series, which is actually continuing. I think he's on volume 5 now, which is the proceedings from the first wild and seedling pomological exhibition. The result is a pomona, or an illustrated catalog of apple varieties. Kaminsky expanded the scope of his work, inviting people to submit apples to his exhibition and publication. Most works in the pomona genre, which has antecedents in Enlightenment Europe, have featured cultivated fruits. Kaminsky's pomona features wild fruit discovered, named, used, and sometimes cultivated by foragers from around North America. And finally, the final publication I want to show you is this one. This is a small little zine that circulates in the American cider community called Malice. And in it, Melissa Madden, who is a cider maker in the Finger Lakes, brought political dimensions to bear on the ideology and practice of foraging. In her essay, a brief and potentially erroneous history of the Finger Lakes National Forest Apple Commons, end quote. In the zine published in 2020, Madden brings our attention back to the circumstances in which apples first came to be cultivated on American land in the first place, through the displacement, theft of land, and genocide of indigenous peoples. The process that legendary American folk hero Johnny Appleseed himself was complicit in. His participation in planting the original seedling orchards marked the vanguard of white settlement across upstate New York, northern Pennsylvania, into Ohio and Indiana. Madden, writing about her foraging activities in the Finger Lakes of New York and her growing consciousness around the history of the land where she forages, says this: "We know that our colonial heritage includes the destruction of another people's place. We know we have inherited this earth by decimating the Haudenosaunee ability to feed their families in their home places. When I seek wild apples, I try to keep all this in mind. I consider my own role in the flow of history, the use of this site, the displacement and disenfranchisement that exists even more strongly now for Indigenous people who call this home. This is also a questioning of why I have had such success and what it means when others are deprived. It is a questioning of the wild foraging paradigm in our cider culture, of our reverence for the wild trees and our own use of their abundance." Malice is a publication aimed at a grassroots enthusiast within the community of cider makers and producers. It's a small but influential forum for grassroots discussion amongst this community, and it has been a venue for the introduction of discussions of controversial and complicated issues within the cider industry. And Madden's article, among others, highlighted growing interests in addressing issues of social justice and historical inequity in a community characterized by a majority of white participants. So back to our regions of New York State, just to give you a little reminder. Now I'm going to transition into showing you some of the people who I met. So I, in 2022, in the summer and fall, took a big road trip, and I just went out and basically did a lot of field work. And I was looking to talk to foragers in their foraging places about their process, their motivation, why they're doing what they're doing, and how they're doing what they're doing. One of the people I met was Dave Snyder, and oops, sorry. I've chosen a selection of people to sort of give a both geographical, broad spectrum and a spectrum of different kinds of motivations and practices. This is Dave from Left Bank Cider Company. He has been all over. He's lived in Chicago. He's lived in New York. He's really an urban person. He's done a lot of urban gardening, and he moved upstate and was hiking. And he started finding orchards in the places that he was hiking. And this is what he says. Both of us, he and his partner, came up going hiking in the mountains all the time. And every time we had a moment, we go up to the mountains here. We're both into mushroom foraging. So we go up and we do like a mushroom walk, we go for a swim in the lake, we go camping. And when we're up there, of course, we're noticing these wild apples, and we're sort of, the year is 2019. That was a big apple year. And we're noticing all these apples up there, and we're just looking at them and thinking, these apples are just falling and being eaten by deer. So that was, we're thinking about, could we put these to use? He's one of the people who's really influenced by urban forestry, urban farming, and he knows the New York market. So much of what happens, even in rural areas of upstate New York, is influenced by are they going to be able to sell this to New York City? And he's one of these people, and he starts this business, and but has a really local following in his upstate New York place. Another person I interviewed was this guy, Kurt Knuth. He was just a hobbyist. He wasn't a commercial producer, but he's really interested in the history of the area, where he is also a hiker. He says, the apples, I guess the biggest fascination there is the settlement patterns of this area have changed a lot over the last couple of hundred years. And there were a lot of higher elevation farms, maybe in the 1920s or 30s, that were pretty marginal. So he encounters and forages with a very historical, sort of like retracing steps of history, mindset, and attitude. This is Melissa, who we heard from her article in Malice. And these are some of the places where she is foraging. She actually used to co-own a fairly large and well-known cider company in the Finger Lakes region, and then lost her farm when she and her partner split up. And that was a really traumatic event for her. And foraging became not only a practice of reclaiming her own relationship to the region and reforging her relationships with people in the community, but also began this sense of like review, historical review and political review that really characterizes her work. And she forages, and she does sell her foraged fruit, but she considers it more of an art project than a commercial thing. Way up in northern New York on the border with Canada is Bill McKentley and his partners, Connor and Alyssa Hardiman. They own a nursery, which Bill has passed on to Connor and Alyssa now. And they had a really interesting approach. They were really interested in wild trees or feral trees that survive. Can they survive the cold winter? And what they were interested in was, If it's a really old tree, that means that it's survived multiple test winters. It has survived through cold snaps that have killed everything else. They're looking for cold, hardy fruit trees. And so for them, those trees that are wild that have survived have demonstrated their cold hardiness. And so it's a natural selection process that then they're also using for their own benefit in selecting these trees and then bringing them into their nursery business. And lastly, I just wanted to show you Mike Biltonen. He's an orchard consultant. He works all over the country, but a lot in New York State and the Northeast. And he had a really interesting take on this relationship between this vernacular practice, its commercial components, and then relationships with industry and academia. He really had a big critique to talk to me about the ways that industry and university communities can take advantage of this citizen science that's happening at the vernacular level. And so he really wanted to emphasize that this is a form of community science that we should pay more attention to and give more credence to and more credit to. So I visited a lot of people, I gathered some apples, and then we bring them back to the lab at Cornell. And that's where my colleague Greg Peck and his team take over. And just to give you a sense, our sample is very small. This is really kind of like a test case to see what we can find and what might make for a more robust collection method at a later time if we ever take this project somewhere else. But I think what's significant just in terms of fruit analysis is that these fruits are very high in tannin and acid. So the foragers they're selecting consciously for certain traits. And that is part of their practice. Next, we do send them off for genetic testing to see if they are known cultivars. And interestingly, in our very small sample for the first year that we did collections, 15 of the 19 were unknown varieties, so they were seedlings. And we weren't sure how we were like, well, are these people just finding known cultivars that were lost? Or are they really true seedlings? And they really were true seedlings, which was interesting. And they had a range of potential grandparents and parents. I've listed them on the slide there. And lastly, I just want to show you our team because this is a team-based effort. Me, Dr. Gregory Peck, who is our horticulturalist. We have a number of students, Andrew James and Victoria Broughton, and then Mike Brown, our lab technician, who does a lot of that analysis in the lab. And we have a great time working together. And here if you are interested, there's a website for the project, which you can scan from the QR code there. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maria. That was great. Lots of happy people again. We're talking about cider, so I have to put on my Gloucester Rugby shirt. I'm contractually obliged to do that. It feels weird talking about cider without wearing this. Right, if anyone's got any questions, do put them in the Q&A button. I saw some appear in the chat and then sort of disappeared. I'm working again, please. I'm trying to be professional here. There's people watching. Oh, for God's sake. Right, hang on a minute. Okay, there we go. Right, let's look at some questions. One that just popped up, Maria, was from Naomi. You mentioned the indigenous people, the original owners of the land you were discussing, and Naomi's just asked about the Haudenosaunee. I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing it wrong. Haudenosaunee, I think. And Naomi's asking if you've engaged with them in your work to access all of their knowledge and bring them into the network.
So that was something that we are interested in doing, but have not done yet. And it's something that some of the people who we have engaged with who are doing this foraging activity do have their own relationships with people in the Haudenosaunee Nation and community. We have not extended that, like our own project to that yet, but would like to. But we want to do it really thoughtfully. So we've sort of held back from doing that until we really feel confident that we have a good approach to that.
Thank you very much. Eva has got a dog as well now. It's a battle of the dogs. Go on, second boy, second. Right, Eva, Moray has asked if the local community are involved with planting but also maintaining the orchard fruit trees that have been going in. I know the one main project you talked about hasn't yet come to fruition, I was going to say, no pun intended, but is there a plan to engage people in the maintenance too?
Yes, of course. So when we got from the local community the idea to use this particular plot, they were aware of it being owned by the city. We inspected the area, and we made contact with the local school. And actually, we are trying to organize, school will organize that, like a local group of children and their parents who will take care of the orchards and take care of any gardening works. So the city holding company will do the basic maintenance work, but this fine-tuning will be done by the local people, and they will be organized both through the school and through the district council.
Great, thank you. And obviously that's another good way of reducing the vandalism as well, I think. And the way that you're engaging the teenagers particularly was just brilliant, because I think that's often, I think a lot of tree planting projects around the UK and around the world have issues with vandalism, and sometimes the best way to do that is to engage all parts of the community, but particularly perhaps those people who may be engaged in vandalism at a later date, to get them behind it and make them feel ownership over it.
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's the main problem that we are seeing. That's the main risk of the project, is vandalism. So we are hoping that the more we engage the community and the more parts of the community we engage, the safer the space will be.
Thank you. Maria, we've got all sorts of eclectic questions coming in, so we're jumping over all sorts of topics here. But what I was... Oh, actually, I'm going to interrupt to say, because Andy's just said about a wassail and community involvement, and we are going to plant an orchard in Stonehouse here. And I'm doing that specifically because I want us to have a wassail, and I want us to get out there and beat the apple trees with sticks and dance around them and bring on a good harvest. While I'm talking about Stonehouse, someone also said earlier on about local authorities getting rid of allotments. I'm very pleased to say that Stonehouse Town Council is expanding the allotments that we've got here, because we really do want, not that I'm on the town council, but we really want to encourage people to get involved with that sort of thing. So there's a little plug for Stonehouse and, of course, for Gloucestershire again. So the question I was going to ask you, Maria, that I've already basically forgotten. Where was it? There was something. Oh, I'm going to go with any. Oh, okay. So Bill and Sarah have asked kind of similar questions again about the indigenous peoples who were the owners, as Naomi has said, of the land before the Europeans got there. And the question really is, were they using the apples to make cider themselves? Do we know? Were they using apples to get a fermented beverage from?
Well, and I saw some other questions about whether apples were grown or present before European settlement. And there are several answers to that. The European, Malus domestica, of course, comes over with European settlement. It's generally thought that indigenous communities did use crab apples that are native to North America in their culinary traditions, and still use them today. But as European settlement, comes into contact with indigenous communities, so too does their agricultural products. And so one of the interesting stories of New York State and the United States in general, but in New York State in particular, during the American Revolution, there is this campaign called the Sullivan-Clinton campaign, in which the Americans basically send this General Sullivan up into the Finger Lakes region to destroy indigenous communities who are allied with the British. And they destroy orchards. And there is documented, accounts of this. There were peach orchards that the Haudenosaunee cultivated on the shores of Seneca Lake. Probably there were apple orchards. We think there were apple orchards cultivated by indigenous communities in the northern parts of the Finger Lakes as well. There's a great book called The Ghost Orchard, which I have on my, actually I have it right here. I know you're going to ask me about books later, but
there's always plenty of time to talk about books.
This is The Ghost Orchard. There's an interesting chapter in here about indigenous orchards in this region and this whole story. Whether they use them to make cider, I've never heard that, but it doesn't mean it couldn't have been the case. Good question, worth following up more.
Thank you. I've just made a note of The Ghost Orchards, and I'm going to buy that one and read it. Thank you very much. Right, what else have we got? Eva, Paul has made the observation that in the UK, local governments often don't plant fruit trees because they're worried about the fruit becoming a problem, or, you know, people slipping on them, or there being a mess, some of the problems that you described at the beginning of your presentation. And Paul's asking whether you think having the local community more involved in the selection and the planting and the care of fruit trees might change that view, particularly in places where the local community might actually use the fruit. Is that something you found, Eva, when you're trying to make the case for more fruit trees to be planted?
Well, yes, if you have some sort of idea how the orchard will be used, who will be using it, who will spend time there, and if you implement this in design of the orchard, it will make success more probable. And of course, it's important to choose what kind of trees you want, what kind of fruits you want, and but to me, the main point is to know who will spend time there and who will take care of that place. And to do that, I think it's always useful to have this sort of co-design process, to involve people and to have them actually not just informed, but involved in the whole design process, and to give them some sort of belonging to this place and some sort of, not maybe ownership, but really the sense of belonging. And I think that's the key part. So when we were preparing for these workshops that we had with the children and with the local people, we were talking with the headmistress of the school. So she knows a lot about vandalism, and she knows exactly which kids are problematic ones. So she told us how they are trying to involve those particular children in any kind of community action, because in that way you sort of take this anger out of their hands. So I think when you plan an orchard, these are probably the two main points: the people who will take care of it and the people who might destroy it. So if you take that into account, then you can prevent any kind of adverse outcome.
Thank you very much. We're talking a lot in the chat about allotments today, and it's not necessarily aimed at either of our speakers, but of course, if you've got something you want to say, then please do. But Paul's mentioned about local governments getting rid of allotments. That's where I saw it earlier on. How can we convince local government why the features are so vital? Christina's put in the chat that in the UK, if a council believes there's demand for allotments, they have a statutory duty to provide a sufficient number of plots. So there are statutory tools to do it. It's a town or parish council responsibility to provide for and maintain allotments in the UK. So you should definitely try and push for that, because they are absolutely brilliant. Someone said we should get victory gardens back. Paul, oh, it's you again. Victory gardens, dig for victory. Right, so yes, allotments are good. We like them. Now, of course, this will be a seamless link, and this is why I'm a professional. Watch this. Of course, allotments are fantastic for biodiversity as well as food production. And we've got a question about biodiversity from Tim, and another one from an anonymous attendee asking about pollinators and birds, particularly in the orchards. And the question is really both of you. Eva, in your urban orchards, do you find that you're getting attracting birds into there? And is there any particular provision for pollinators? Are you doing any sort of bug hotels or anything else, or are you just letting the trees do their thing?
No. Yes, of course. They are part of the design of the urban orchards are bee hotels and biodiversity meadow, which is of course not mowed regularly, but maybe once a year to give time for the autochthonic plants to grow and to have their like growth and to have their cycle. So this is really important. Well, this particular urban orchard is very close to the natural area, but still, as we all know, it's important to have places for pollinators and to have bee-friendly zones. Even though we are close to nature, you have to sort of make these bridges between parts of the natural areas. So yeah, this is something that was thought about and that's included in the project. About allotment gardens, I know you haven't asked me that, but this is something that the city of Zagreb has actively been doing for 12 years. And what we know is that there's always the demand is very high. So when we are constantly in search of areas that could be good as allotment gardens, and if it's owned by the city, if it's a natural area, I mean, if it's unbuilt and if the soil is clean, you have to do the soil analysis, of course, because it's in the city, and you cannot make an allotment garden if you have contaminated soil. So if all of these criteria are met, then we are trying to introduce new allotment gardens. The ones that are being annulled are the ones as this allotment garden scheme in Zagreb is actually temporary use on areas that are sometimes destined for other uses. So if, for example, you have an area for a school and finally you get the budget for the school and you plan to build it, then you have to remove the garden. But then we are always looking for alternative sites, and it's a constant search.
Brilliant. That's really positive. Thank you very much. And it was always difficult anywhere, isn't it? With all the development pressures and everything that we've got, it's hard enough planting a tree, let alone finding a substantial space for an allotment. But it's great that they're doing some good stuff in Zagreb. Maria, on the sort of biodiversity and bird species, particularly question, the specific question about the birds was about migratory species in the UK coming through and feasting on the fall and winter apples. Is that something that you see happening in the orchards that you've been looking at in the Northwest?
Interesting question. I can't answer about birds. Unfortunately, I'm not a birder, but I do know what is interesting is that so a lot of these these trees that are being foraged, they're either these wild seedlings that have propagated themselves from cultivated orchards, or they are abandoned old orchards that have second growth, forest has sort of consumed as the Northeast has reforested itself as farming has retreated, as the scale of farming has had to become bigger. These smaller marginal farms have reforested, and that's where these fruits are being found. Which is to say, is that there's a lot of animals that like eating these fruit, like the deer. Lots of other, I'm sure, small mammals are in there. Interestingly, some of these sites, like the Finger Lakes National Forest, have communal grazing programs in them, so the cows like to eat them. And some people who I've met specifically keep these fruit trees in these reforested, formerly farmed places to attract deer for hunting. And they have set up their deer hides so that they can, so the deer will come and they'll get the deer. So it is a very interesting, like all the different kinds of ecosystems that are existing around this fruit, and not just a human one. Obviously, lots of other species enjoy it as well.
Thank you very much. And as you mentioned deer, I'll jump straight onto another question. We have one from Rebecca who commented on the deer eating the wild apples. Rebecca's asked if there's any sort of pests on the wild apples that you know of there. Cydonia pomonella is the pest that was mentioned, which I know obviously is the codling moth, and I definitely didn't just Google it. But are there any particular pests and diseases affecting the orchards that you've looked at? Sorry, that was for you, Maria. Sorry for the pests and diseases on the orchard. So
pests
smaller things.
Sorry, I was thinking inside my mind instead of. I think
best place to think.
What's interesting is that the reasons that some of the foragers that we are interviewing are so interested in this fruit is because it has sort of undergone this like natural selection, right? It has survived in disease, areas. It is persevering. And so when we've collected fruit, yes, it will have some disease on it. But by and large, the trees seem like they're doing well, they're healthy, and in the cider making process, of course, these fruits don't need to look good, right? So a lot of the cosmetic diseases that might require intervention in a cultivated setting aren't really such an issue here.
Yeah, no, interesting. Thank you very much indeed. We've got a question, Jokabas. Normally I don't take questions through the chat, but I'm going to do it. It's a question for Iva. And Jokabas is asking, what do you think is the best practice to get the communal block estates community to plant fruit trees in between the buildings? How do you go about getting involved the residents who don't always get involved in caring for green spaces? We talk a lot about including people in inclusivity and reaching communities, but it can be hard to engage some people because some people feel maybe it's not their place or it's not for them. How do you reach those harder to reach communities in your work, Iva?
Well, it's not something that I do, but it has been on my mind just recently. I've heard that within an urban block in the city center of Zagreb, a friend of mine actually told me about that because that's a block where she lives, that some of the residents want to tear down the trees because they want to make spaces for cars. So I told her, okay, you need to do something about it through the local community. Like this instant, because once the trees are gone, you cannot repair it. You have to work. Like in prevention here. And about the question, well, I guess actually there are some fruit trees within the blocks, if I understood you correctly, because this is actually, these are maybe old trees, and I have 2 cherry trees in my own garden, which is within an urban block. But I think it's really up to the people, because what the city can do, the city can manage a public space. The areas within the blocks are usually private space. So the city can maybe give some kind of incentive, but if the tree is not protected within the private block, it's not the domain of the city. Maybe it could be done through I don't know, some sort of citizens initiative that can talk about it, give it some public, make some public awareness about the topic. So these are the possible ways to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What the city can do, the city can manage the areas that are owned by the city, the privately owned areas or areas owned by the state. It's beyond our control.
Thank you very much. Maria, There's a couple of people asking about the science. So, George.
I'll do my best, but I'm the social scientist on this team, so I'll see what I can answer.
That's fine. I just blag all of it, and they haven't picked me up on it yet, so don't worry about it. George has asked if you could maybe talk a bit more about the lab in Washington that sequences the genetics. And George has then said, and I love it when I have to ask things I don't understand, I heard that some members of North American Fruit Explorers 501c3 nonprofit use it as well. So there are words that I don't understand, but thank you, George. So there's that question. And then linked to that, I think, is that Sally's asked if apple flesh is used for the DNA analysis, because in the UK, Sally says we tend to use leaves for our DNA analysis.
Okay, I can answer with some science. Question. Okay. Yes. So I'm going to put in the chat the website for Washington State University's tree fruit genetics program. So we send leaf samples, not fruit flesh samples, but leaf samples, as you indicated, to the lab at Washington State, where Dr. Cameron Peace has a longstanding, internationally renowned program of sequencing apple genetics. And so we send the leaf samples off to him, just like the people at NAFAX, which is the North American Fruit Explorers organization. And you too, anybody can send stuff to him to get genetic sequencing for a tree. If it does cost, there's a cost associated with it. But it may take a while too. It sort of takes a long time for us to get the results back because he has a lot of stuff going on in his lab. But yeah, I hope that sends you to the right place. I'll also put in the chat the website for our project, which I had via QR code before.
Brilliant. See, no problem with the science.
Yes.
It's easy.
That one I can do.
Science is easy. I don't know why people say it's so hard. Good. Okay. Well, we got a couple of minutes left. It's another question from Maria, actually, but it's from Andrew, and he's asking about whether there's much interest in wild pears and perry in the region you've been talking about. We're focusing on apples, but what about pears?
Great question. So interestingly, in the 2 years that we did this project and we're collecting fruit samples, we were only collecting apples. And it happened to be a terrible 2 years to try and collect apples. The first year was a really bad drought, and a lot of the wild trees that we would have liked to have taken samples from simply had no fruit. And then the second year, there was a really bad spring frost in late May, which wiped out not only wild stuff, but commercial fruit in upstate New York in 2023. And so again, places where we would have liked to have gotten apple samples from were not doing so well that year. So our collection sample is flawed, but interesting in that respect. To the pear question, interestingly, in those years, some of these people who were usually collecting apples were collecting pears. And there was a real upsurge of interest in pears amongst some people. And I think the thing is it ties back to the genetics question before. There is not as robust a database of pear genetics as there is apple genetics. So we can't really do the same kinds of genetic comparisons. But I think it would be really interesting to do a similar kind of look at pears, because some of the people we were talking to were starting to get really interested in pears, partially because they just love pears, partially because there were pears around. Whether that has anything to do with their resilience in these adverse weather conditions that were badly affecting the apples would be interesting to find out.
Brilliant, thank you. I think perry, it's controversial, but perry can be nicer than cider sometimes. I'm a big fan of it.
I love perry. In fact, one of my favorite book that you're going to ask me about later, I have a pear book.
Well, I was going to actually go straight onto the favorite book question, but I'm not going to, because I just saw one more question, and sorry, it's for you again, Maria. I'm picking on you at the end. But there's a question I really like from Christine. asking whether or not these old orchards are going to be lost to succession growth as the forests regrow, or are the trees going to be maintained by the foragers going forward? And that's a really interesting question. Are the people going out there foraging going to protect the trees now from the encroaching forest?
That's a great question, and there's so many layers to that question. I think so. One of the things that we found was that there's some people are going out and they're really into getting the fruit from the tree that's out there in this second growth forest. Like the terroir, the sense of place is really important to them. Other people are more interested in this sense of what has survived, and they're interested in the genetic material and propagating that. So they go and they take a cutting from that tree in the forest, and then they, graft it and plant it in their own cultivated space in order to use this seedling as material, genetic material for a new cultivated variety. So whether people are going to protect these trees out in the forest really depends on what their relationship with the tree is. And a lot of people, it is hard work to get out there. People who are doing this in these forested areas do have to sort of do a little bit of clearing around the tree just to make it accessible, to help it maybe, do a little pruning. But that really varies. It's really about what the person's goals are with regard to the fruit, the plant material, the tree itself, the property. We didn't even talk about like how people are, what their relationships to the land and the properties that they're finding these trees on is. That's a whole other thing. Public versus private land, very interesting. So yeah, I think it really is context dependent. But one of the most interesting things to me is that people are using this as a sort of genetic reservoir for new cultivated material in some cases.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got like 2 minutes to go and we'll bring it in bang on time because we are professionals. So I'm going to ask the last question of the evening, which is, of course, we'll go for Eva first. Eva, what is your favorite tree-ish related book?
Thank you for the question. That's a really tough one, and I need to find out more about tree books. I actually bookmarked some of those that were mentioned during Maria's presentation, which was fantastic, and thank you for that. But I'm going to present the book. Oh, it's blurred, but it's called Climatic Architecture, but by Philippe Ram, who is a French architect that is trying to find out ways to combat the effects of climate change through architecture. So I think it's very relevant for our times. It's not about the tree, but next time I'll read a book about the tree.
No, that's perfect. Hey, not everybody says stuff about trees. I'm just putting that in the chat because I know people are going to ask me, so that looks good. Thank you very much. Good one. Okay, Maria, I am very envious of your bookshelf, I have to say. So at some point, we're just going to have a webinar where you just read through all the stuff you've got on your bookshelf.
I do. I do love collecting books. I'm cheating. I have two in addition to the other one I already told you about. So we had commiserated earlier. This book, The New Silva, which I bought on one of my recent trips to the UK, is just beautiful. It's like modeled after Evelyn's Silva, and it is the illustrations in the book are just like you see on the cover. Totally gorgeous and worth it. But then this is my pear book. This, maybe some of you on the webinar might recognize, this is Perry Pears, the National Fruit and Cider Institute at Long Ashton, which was the research facility in the UK. And it's basically this guy going out and looking for pears in Gloucestershire and Herefordshire, in that region of the three counties. And he just took a lot of photos of some really awesome trees and basically tried to sort out what they were and what their names were in an era before genetic testing. So this is like a book that people, once they get their hands on it, they'll like really, it's precious book.
That sounds great. And an unprompted mention of Gloucestershire, which I always approve of. Of course, Herefordshire in many ways is just North Gloucestershire, really, isn't it? That's one way of looking at it.
Ooh, fighting words.
It's fine. They can't get me. I'm safe. I'm safe behind my screen. Those are great choices of book. Oh, someone's gone, ooh, someone, tough crowd. Someone's in from Herefordshire. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Eva. They were great presentations. Thank you to all of you out there in audience land. You're all wonderful as ever, and some really great chats and discussions. We'll be sending the questions in the chat to Eva and Maria afterwards, just in case they want to have a look or whatever. So that will be going to them. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Andrew, for helping out. Thank you, Steele, of course, for sponsoring. And I really hope that you can all join us next week to talk about fluid dynamics and trees and wind. Don't say we don't give you a broad scope of topics. That's going to be something very different and equally exciting. So thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you to Maria and Eva once again. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much.